definitely need some Tic Tacs or something, because your breath stinks!
Really?
DreamWorks Pictures presents Shrek.
Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animated movies not made by Disney. I'm your host, Octaviano Macias, and today we're talking about easily the most famous animated movie I've talked about on this show so far. You love them, you saw them sell out, you've even memed them to death. Yes, I'm talking about Shrek, the 2001 Best Animated Film winner that, honestly, do I even have to explain this one? You know the story, right? Animated movie about an ogre who finds his swamp overrun by fairy tale creatures, goes to meet with the Lord that made it that way, makes a deal, saves a princess, falls in love with the princess, and it eventually spawned 3 sequels, a spin-off, so many specials, a ride. What didn't this thing spawn? Honestly, it feels like it was everywhere, to a point that I remember there even being newspaper headlines, magazine covers, all just because he was becoming a father in the third movie. They were like, oh, look at the new celebrity father, and you know, all that stuff. So yeah, Shrek. But we're talking specifically about the original movie. I'm not going to go into the sequels. Someday I will go into the sequels, but today I'm mainly talking about that first movie, which feels very different from its sequels. Even compared to its sequels, it's very adult. It feels very much like a different product. Now, granted, not that, again, not going into the sequels too much, but compared to the sequels, this movie does feel very different, like in terms of how it's approached, in terms of how the story goes along, the humor, just the way every character talks, because it's very mature. I mean, granted, it's still family friendly enough for kids to watch, but compared to a lot of movies that were made just like, you know, animated movies that were made afterwards, even its own sequels, it feels very adult.
Although she lives with 7 other men, she's not easy.
And that's the biggest thing that I will say about this movie, is that compared to other DreamWorks animated movies, compared to its sequels, compared to a lot of its competitors, whether it's Disney or other companies, a lot of the humor, the language, the material is very different from what was being done, from what's even being done today, just because a lot of it is aimed directly at adults. Like, you get jokes that are clearly supposed to be penis jokes, masturbation jokes, stuff like that. Like, they say it in a way that it's like, it can kind of slip by, but it's not too hard for someone who, you know, just to think about it a few seconds to notice, like, hey, wait a second, I just noticed Lord Farquaad looking at his boner as the magic mirror is talking about the princess. Wild, right? Now, granted, why this movie took off is anyone's guess. I mean, of course, there's the quality. It was like nothing before it. Still feels like nothing that has come afterwards. And while, yes, I will agree that there are better movies being made, and there were better movies even at that time, it was just so unique that it felt like a breath of fresh air. Even if a good chunk of why some people might have turned to it is just because, realistically speaking, this is a very petty movie against Disney. Now, granted, I'm not saying that you can't mock Disney. Of course, anyone can mock Disney. Disney's mocked themselves. And yeah, I have no issues with movies deciding, hey, let's just make fun of the mouse. But when I say that this movie is petty, it is very petty, and you can notice it right away. Why is that? Well, you see, DreamWorks Animation, the company behind this movie, was founded by 3 people. Steven Spielberg, I'm blacking out on the other guy's name. I know it's something Jeffen. That's with a G. I'm gonna feel so bad once I remember it, but whatever, moving along. And Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey Katzenberg is the important name of the bunch, because Jeffrey Katzenberg previously had worked with Disney Animation. He was the head of Disney Animation between the 80s to around the mid-90s. Pretty much a lot of the movies that a lot of 90s kids like myself remember, like Beauty and the Beast, not Sleeping Beauty, Little Mermaid, The Lion King, result of his leadership. So yeah, you'd think he would be a great man, but like many other execs, Jeffrey Katzenberg is kind of an ass. Now, granted, whether or not he's as bad as other people, of course, that you can look at it from your own perspective, but for the most part, Jeffrey Katzenberg, very petty man, often made a lot of choices to spite other people, and Shrek is no exception. See, what had happened was that he got a little too big for his position, as in he started demanding more and more power. kind of wanted more. And the head of Disney at the time, Michael Eisner, was like, okay, let's cut this at the bud. Let's just kick him out. And that was the end of that, at least he thought. See, Jeffrey Katzenberg, along with Spielberg and the other guy, again, sorry, I'm forgetting your name, decided to fund this company, DreamWorks, and through that, he was like, okay, let's make an animation studio, and you could tell right out the gate that it was a very he was being very petty about it, which was understandable. He had just been fired, but at the same time, like I said, very petty. Like, you, compared to other petty men in this business, Jeffrey Katzenberg might be the top petty man, because you have like the first animated movie from DreamWorks, Ants, that's with a Z, that was pretty much being done because like, hey, Disney and Pixar are doing this bug movie, let's quickly beat them to it by making our own bug movie with ants. And so that continued with Shrek, which of course you can tell right away, there's a lot of the fairy tale character stuff, there's jabs at Disney with like Pinocchio and other stuff that Disney has done, but most importantly, the biggest thing to tell you that, yeah, this is a very petty movie, comes down to the villain of the movie, who is Lord Farquaad. Now, Lord Farquaad, you know, if you say it fast enough, you might notice that Farquaad sounds a bit like fuckwad. And there's a reason for that. Lord Farquaad was based off of Michael Eisner. Now, this has never been fully confirmed by anyone on board, but, I mean, one look at the man and one look at the character, you would notice right away, yeah, Farquaad looks a lot like Michael Eisner. And add to it, Farquaad is a short character, and we'll get into why that's a little messed up later on, but of course, for now, let's just stick with the pettiness. Apparently, Michael Eisner was a lot taller than Jeffrey Katzenberg, and I don't know if it was like that constant or just occasionally. Point is that Eisner would kind of make fun of Katzenberg for his size. So this was like a big, like, okay, let's make Michael Eisner really tiny, call him fuckwad, call him Farquaad, because it sounds like fuckwad, and that'll be the movie. We're going to be mocking him, we're going to be laughing at him, this ugly ogre is going to be mocking a bunch of Disney stuff, and we're just going to have a blast with that. That's Shrek. Very petty movie, like I said. But it's also a very charming and genuine movie, which is why it holds up. Because honestly, if it had just been the petty stuff, it would not be the beloved classic that it is. And realistically, 2 decades later, looking at it, yeah, it is a classic. You can see why this movie took off the way it did. You can see what makes it so charming. Everything about it really does hold up. Granted, I do have to wonder how much of this was supposed to be petty to begin with, as looking at it, you would realize that, okay, during the production of this, and this is pretty well known, Chris Farley was originally supposed to be the voice of Shrek instead of Mike Myers. Now, nothing against Mike Myers, I do like his performance, but with Chris Farley, you see that it could have been a different movie, not just because Chris Farley is a different type of comedian from Mike Myers, but because, well, eventually some of it, not a whole lot, pretty much just like 2 minutes of Chris Farley's audio did leak out. Now, how much Chris Farley did before he passed away, I don't know. I've heard some people say that it's about 90% of the movie that was done, but again, I don't know. This was, of course, you know, when he passed away, it was years before Shrek had even been finished and released on top of that. So it's hard to say when exactly, how much exactly Chris Farley would have done. That being said, that clip that leaked out does show a bit more of a sentimental, emotional side to the movie that you don't see from the finished product. Now, granted, that may just be because it was the scene that leaked out is essentially the most emotional and somber moment of the movie that we got in the finished product. But given that Chris Farley was just essentially doing his own voice, not doing like a wacky voice, like not that Mike Myers' voice is that wacky, but it is him doing essentially a silly Scottish accent, one that he's done before for other sillier characters. It makes you think like, okay, maybe Chris Farley would have had a slightly more emotional version of Shrek. Maybe not, but that is the way I see it on his case. So maybe it wasn't always supposed to be as petty as it was, but then once Mike Myers came on board, once he threw out that Scottish accent, maybe the people decided to build on that in terms of like, okay, let's add some of the wackiness that Shrek would be known for, like not necessarily like the pop culture references or the music, but in terms of just some of the mean-spiritedness, just because between Farley's regular voice and Myers' silly Scottish voice, Myers' Scottish voice sounds a bit crueler, which understandable. It kind of works for Shrek in terms of this is a character who's supposed to be alone, he's supposed to hate people and whatnot. But I kind of feel like I was more sorry for Farley. Now, granted, maybe Farley's version would have been bad. I don't know. I'm just going off of what I've heard. I'm just saying that with his version, it didn't sound like it could have been as like the same thing where it would have been as silly and comedic, you know? That's just my take on it, though. Mainly, I just wanted to share this just to get some stuff out of that. I do wonder if his version was supposed to be as petty as the version we ended up getting. In the end, though, it doesn't really matter because honestly, whether Farley had stayed on there, Shrek really does hold up in a way that it's kind of sad that most people nowadays only think about the memes when they think of Shrek. Because, don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against memes. I love memes myself. But at a certain point, it starts to feel like, okay, people are only thinking of this character in this ironic, dumb way. When you look at the movie, yeah, it's a very petty movie. And if it was just petty, I would have understood it more. Just being recognized and remembered as just this dumb, silly thing. But you look at it and it's like, no, it's actually a very heartfelt, emotional movie. The story is really well done. It's paced really well. It's just a really solid experience, and it's one that I can see how much of it, you know, is still beloved just because it is really well done. Even the animation, which is probably the part that holds up the least, even less than the pettiness that you find from Jeffrey Katzenberg inserted into the movie. Because the animation, and this has always been a problem with CG animation, is that while it was cutting edge at the time it came out, you could see how bad it's been dated. Unlike 2D animation, unlike stop motion, or pretty much any other form of entertainment, CG, regardless of how detailed it is never going to hold up in a few years when the tech gets better. Now, granted, there are some more stylistic movies that have come out since that I think hold up a bit more, because with this movie, within 5 years, it already looked kind of bad. I'm not gonna kid you guys, it looks kind of bad, but I'll get back into the animation before I make this point. After I make this point. When it comes to like later animated movies, like stuff from, I'd say, the late 2000s, early 2010s, you'd think that those wouldn't hold up as much, and to be fair, some of them don't look as good as some of the new stuff that's come out, but there's still a lot of them that look a lot better than, say, this movie did compared to when its sequel came out 3 years later. Like something like Claudio with a Chance of Meatballs that came out 11 years ago or 12 years ago, I think, at the very least, holds up really well. Even though, yeah, there's been better animated movies in terms of just the visual and look since then, that one at the very least does look like the tech is still relevant to what's being used now. Whereas with Shrek, yeah, like I was saying, even 3 years after, once the sequel came out, it looked very dated, and this was something that I noticed even when the movie was still pretty new. Now looking at it 2 decades later, and it doesn't hold up so well. Mainly the humans is what's bad on it. A lot of the humans just look, ugly, and to be fair, that kind of works in favor of Fiona. I mean, spoiler alert, but then again, they've made a million of these Shrek stuff. You probably already know the big spoiler. Fiona becomes an ogre at the end, and then in a way, the bad animation on her human self kind of works because it at least kind of gives the message of like, hey, look, this version, which is supposed to be the pretty one, actually doesn't look as good as the ogre version, which is the true beautiful one, because that's who she truly is. But I know that wasn't the intention. I know that the humans were not supposed to look butt ugly. Thankfully, the creatures, the ogres, the animals, most of the fairy tale creatures that aren't human-like do hold up, just because they at least, are so cartoony that they're like, okay, that's fine. There's still issues with the motion and the animation, just because a lot of the characters feel kind of stiff when they move, but for the most part, the only thing that I will say holds up fine is just the designs on the creatures. They look fine even if they're not as detailed as a lot of modern day stuff would be, and even the stuff from the sequels. But yeah, I mean, I really hope I don't get a lot of hate for this, but yeah, the animation, and again, sadly, this is the thing with CG animation, doesn't hold up so well. It is the one aspect that I will say, yeah, that's a problem. But at the same time, who cares when everything else works so well? And that's the important thing. And of course, it's always important to acknowledge, like, hey, this was made this many years ago, so you can excuse it for that. I mean, of course, it's kind of a double standard because there's a lot of 2D animated movies or just live action movies that still look great, even to this day, from even decades before Shrek. But again, this is a problem that's inherent to CGI animation. It's a sad one, but it is a real one. It's something that has to be acknowledged. Shrek, as judging purely on its animation, not very good, but at the same time, that's not all that matters, so I can get by that. And some of the effects also aren't so good on it. I noticed that a lot of the times when you see fire in this movie, it just looks like the basic stuff that you'd learn like on After Effects right away. Like it just looks like, okay, baby's first fire simulation. But hey, at the very least, a lot of the movie still holds up really well. And even if it's not the animation, not the look of the movie, I'm so glad that everything else holds well. Because realistically, the heart of any movie will always come down to its characters, its writing, its story, everything beyond the look. The look is just there for surface level, pleasing, to please the audience. But if it doesn't hold up as well, we can get by that. Now, of course, before I fully delve into my feelings of the movie beyond the animation, and of course, I've already talked about some of the stuff that I like. But before I go any further, I guess, I just want to point out that this, of course, is not my first time watching it. A majority of the people anyone who was there when Shrek came out, realistically, I was there, a lot of other people were there. It's only been 20 years. So, obviously, this would not be the first time that I ever watched this movie. This was a big hit in its day. It spawned a bunch of stuff. I remember at first I was not interested when it was the trailers were coming out, because I was a kid. I was just like, look, I'm not really into the gross out humor. I was never a big fan of like Nickelodeon, like with some exceptions. Like I did watch a lot of SpongeBob when that was new, but when it came to most Nickelodeon stuff, I just didn't bother just because it was nasty, gross out humor, and that was not my kind of thing. I've changed a lot over the years, but with Shrek, that was my whole thing. I was kind of hesitant just because, like, okay, look, it looks like it's making fun of Disney, which, whatever. Not like I was hard defending Disney at the time, but I was just like, I don't want to see a Disney movie with just farts in it, because that's what it looked like. Like, hey, look, let's make a Disney movie, but with farts in it. Of course, it's not a Disney movie, but that's not the point. And yeah, I was just like, I'm not interested in watching this movie. I'm not interested in doing anything with this movie. I'm just gonna skip it. But a lot of people did like the movie. It was a big hit when it came out. So, obviously, within time here means probably a few months, maybe not even that long after the DVD came out, because honestly I can't remember the full time frame on it, but I did see it shortly after it got into home video, because I remember like in school and relatives just being all like, hey, look, this is a good movie, whatever. As a kid, it's not like I can really fight what's being put on half the time, so okay, let's put on Shrek. Yeah, I loved it. It was a really funny movie. It was really different. I didn't get all the jokes at the time. Of course, rewatching it when Shrek 2 came out, Shrek 3, I slowly started getting, some of the more adult jokes in there, because I was like, hey, look, I'm entering my teens, or already was in my teens, depending on which sequel we're talking about. So it was something that held out, and I did go all the way up to part 4 in terms of watching these in theaters. So that was a definite thing where it was like, okay, it was talked about so much that even me, who was not even interested in it to begin with, eventually had to see it just because everyone else was watching it. And yeah, I don't regret it. Obviously, I did had my point where I was just kind of like, okay, this movie's overrated. Part 3 was really stupid. Part 4 I actually think is underrated, but I'll get into that someday when I actually do part 4. And since then, since it became a meme, since there were talks about doing a 5th part, which has not happened yet, but it was originally, from what I remember, supposed to come out this year or maybe next year. I know it was supposed to be like the 20th anniversary, which is this year, but there's been issues with that beyond COVID. It's not just a COVID thing, because I have not heard much development on it. But yeah, there's been talks about doing the 5th part, and over the years I was just like, okay, this is a very overrated movie. Like, I liked it as a kid, but come on, guys, it can't hold up that well. And with that, I was often thinking about the pettiness stuff that I described earlier, some of the pop culture jokes in here, because there's like the Matrix gag, and just some other stuff that it's like, okay, that's clearly done for the kids at the time, but look, it's not gonna hold up so well. Cue in actually rewatching this movie for this video, and I realized, wow, I kind of feel like I've been kind of a dick these last few years to this movie. Like, not that I ever flat out hated it, but that I was treating it like it was something that it wasn't. That it was just a bigger mess. Like, rewatching it within 30 minutes, even quicker than that, really, I was already like, you know what? I'm hooked on watching this. I want to watch it from beginning to end. I actually do love a lot of the banter between Donkey and Shrek and the characters. The writing is smart. The pacing is great, because this is a movie that cuts out all the like the stuff that you would normally see dragging in other movies. Like it just goes from scene to scene to scene very well. It's not something that you see with a lot of movies anymore. I mean, even at the time there was issues with that, but more so now since there's a lot of movies that are focused on trying to be close to 2 hours or even 2 hours. This is a 90-minute movie, and it never feels like it tried being more than that. It's perfectly plotted out. But yeah, I was just in for the ride, and I was just like, you know what? I do think that later animated movies are better. Stuff like Into the Spider-Verse, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Of course, there's the Pixar stuff. Even DreamWorks with Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon. Just a lot of movies that have come out since that are better than this. I'm not gonna argue against that. However, this movie holds up in a way that I hadn't thought of before, just because I have seen so much of the memes at this point that it just feels weird seeing this and realizing it is much more solid than I remember. It holds up really well, and it's just a nice little animated movie. The friendship of Shrek and Donkey, great. I love Eddie Murphy as Donkey. It's really funny. I know a lot of it. It's still that pop culture kind of stuff, but for the most part, it's not like Genie from like Aladdin. It feels natural. It just feels like, okay, this is just a donkey that always talks. So of course he's gonna say a bunch of stuff that is kind of meaningless and stupid, but it's fun. The relationship between Shrek and Fiona feels very genuine, and it feels more genuine than a lot of other relationships I've seen in animated movies since then. Like they actually do take their time building it up while never slowing down to showcase it. Like it's always from beginning to end, from when they meet. You see the banter between them, and just the way they react off of each other feels great. Lord Farquaad, it's the part of the movie that doesn't hold up as well, just because with Lord Farquaad, it is a funny character. You do have great voice work from John Lithgow, but the problem is that it's a bunch of ableist jokes with him. Like, it's just like, hey, look, he's short, and this goes on and on. And to be fair, the movie kind of makes it work, because it is kind of like, okay, one, of course, the whole pettiness with Disney, not that excuses ableism, but okay, understanding from that point, like, okay, so this is just more of a joke on the person rather than actual people like this. But the story kind of works well enough, because like, okay, so he's this larger than life figure who isn't all that large, so I kind of get it. But at the same time, yeah, it's still kind of mean-spirited about it, so I understand from that point why some people might not enjoy it. That being said, he's not in the movie enough to ruin the whole thing, you know? I mean, he gets introduced almost 20 to 30 minutes into the movie. He gets one scene where, not really one scene, but he gets multiple scenes where he's at the castle, but it's always very short, quick stuff, and even by the end, we kind of dispose of him real quick, so we can get by it for the most part. I do think that it would have been stronger if he had just been a normal guy, because, hey, you know, given the message of the movie where it's like, you know, accepting people for how they are instead of how they look. But I can forgive it to some extent in some parts, though obviously, yes, it is an ableist thing, and if you feel offended by it, I totally understand. It is something that is complicated. I'll say complicated in terms of how it's done, but overall, really solid stuff. Like I said, Eddie Murphy as Donkey, great. Mike Myers as Shrek, great. Cameron Diaz as Fiona, great. John Lithgow, really good performance, even though it's a troublesome character, but overall, solid stuff. And everything else about the movie, for the most part, does hold up really well. The animation, not as much, but again, you can kind of forgive it, given that that's a problem with CG in general, and you do have to get into the mindset of understanding, hey, look, this was made at an earlier time, so of course it's not going to be as good looking as something made today. Still an issue, but it's something you can easily forgive, is my point. But yeah, it's a really solid movie. I greatly enjoyed it. I would say that obviously this is definitely worth watching again if you haven't seen it in a while. If you've never seen it somehow, but maybe you're a kid who just snuck onto this, or maybe you just completely skipped out on it, somehow skipped the zeitgeist, all that stuff. So yeah, if you've never watched it, watch it. It's definitely a solid thing. It definitely earned that Best Animated Feature award, even though I prefer Monsters Inc., if I'm completely honest. But at the same time, I do feel like this was very important to win for that year. And for the most part, I do feel like this is a very important animated movie, and it truly showcased what animation could be and evolve into for the 21st century. Obviously, it's gotten past this now, but it was important for setting that ball rolling, because I feel like a lot of animation today would not be where it is, what it is, or even around if it wasn't for this movie. So thankfully this movie exists. I really enjoy it, and yeah, Shrek, it's a masterpiece. Maybe not my favorite movie from DreamWorks. Definitely not my favorite movie of that year. Not my favorite animated movie of that year. But it is a well-deserved win. It is a well-deserved classic. It is something that definitely holds up in film in general. And it's very important to acknowledge its successes and what it did right. So, yeah, Shrek, great movie. This has been Octaviano Macias, host of I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this, please consider supporting my Patreon at www.patreon.com/psychams. That's SAICAMS. www.patreon.com/psychams. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.
Well, it's no wonder you don't have any friends.
Wow. Only a true friend would be that truly honest.
Hey, just wanted to say thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. Comment below if you had any thoughts on this. And if you want to support me even more, there's always the option of Patreon. Yes, I have a Patreon. Patreon would be a great way to help me grow this channel, as it's a great way to get equipment, a great way to let me know what you guys like, and it's a great way to help me financially. Just saying, the more I have on Patreon, the more time I'll have for these videos. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.